Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, on his final day, and oh, thank goodness. But on his final day, he says in a statement, after careful examination of the available facts, I have determined that since at least March 2017, the People's Republic of China, under the direction and control of the Chinese Communist Party, has committed crimes against humanity, against the predominantly Muslim Uyghurs and other members of ethnic and religious minority groups in Xinjiang. He went on to say that the Chinese Communist Party has also committed genocide since at least March of 2017. Someone was president during that time. Someone was in charge during that time, and we're now finding out on the last day. Yeah, I don't think you get this one as a win. Here to share some thoughts on, well, this now admission and what this means for Joe Biden. Tomorrow, I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's great to be with you, especially today.
So I'm looking at this and I'm going, 2017, that was a long time ago. What you been doing since?
Yeah. I mean, keep in mind, Trump took office just 2 months before that, right? So they've had a while to think about this and to act on it. And the intelligence has been there. The publicly available reporting has been there. And I know it may seem unimportant to a lot of folks who are worried about where the next paycheck will come from or how they can stay safe during this pandemic. But more broadly, what happens within China impacts us all as consumers, as workers, as people who have values and a moral compass. And the fact that the Chinese Communist Party has, with the Uyghur population, which is predominantly Muslim in Western China, has done terrible things. I mean, forced sterilization of the women, in some cases, forced marriages with ethnic Chinese, put into what looks a lot like concentration camps, slave labor, forced labor, a complete destruction of their faith traditions, of their culture, of their education system. It has been systematic, and it's impacted millions upon millions of these Uyghurs. And I'm glad that the State Department has declared this a genocide. It is clearly a genocide. And so maybe in that way, they have handed the Biden administration a bit of a gift where Biden can say to the Chinese, well, this was the determination that was made. I have to imagine he's going to stand by it because the facts are irrefutable. And there are a number of key folks within the administration who I assume hold the same point of view as Secretary Pompeo does. But this whole time, Rick, we've known about it. The Trump administration has known about it and hasn't acted on it, and probably hasn't acted on it for its own tactical reasons, thinking it might be easier to get a trade deal with China, or that some other issues might be a little more important to him. And so I guess we can say better late than never, but this by no means demonstrates any sort of 180-degree shift to a moral compass on the part of the Trump administration either.
Yeah, because it's been in the news for at least the last year.
Oh yeah,
and to come out in the 11th hour and now say, we've now decided, it seems a bit off. Now, to your point, I agree. They probably were trying to figure out how they're going to use this in some kind of a trade deal so Trump can come out looking like a winner. And look, and I have to say this every time I talk about Trump and China, I give him credit for drawing attention to the issue. This is something we've been talking about for years now. And the fact that he brought it to the light and now made it okay for the Republican Party to talk about free trade in a different way, I think is a great thing. Good on Trump for that. outside of that, he's boogered up everything else. And how does Biden begin cleaning up the mess? Because our relations are much more heated than they've ever been. Our trade deficits are bigger than they've ever been. And our dependence and reliance on China are well, in this moment of pandemic, are even worse than they've ever been. So Biden's kind of got a real crummy hand.
Yeah. Yeah, he's been handed a terrible hand by Donald Trump. And Donald Trump probably thought he was handed a terrible hand by Barack Obama. He wasn't wrong about that, by the way, on China. And Obama thought he was handed a terrible hand by George Bush. And so it goes back a way. And I'll be honest, no president has gotten it right on China yet. Absolutely no president has come close to getting it right. Nixon through the opening, which was a triangulation, certainly Clinton bringing China into the WTO, Bush not enforcing anything, Obama waiting too late. I mean, enormous mistakes across the board. And Trump was so eager to make a deal on China that he sacrificed a lot of American values in the process and accepted a deal that China is not going to meet, may not face any consequences for meeting, and didn't address the core issues. The people working in factories all across the country depend on, like the fact that they're competing still against the Chinese government and not other private sector companies, or that those imports coming in from China are heavily subsidized, or that China is still manipulating its currency, or that a lot of China's pollution and workers' rights suppression have a price impact, as well as an environmental impact and a real human impact in China that affects jobs here. And just to the point on the Uyghurs, probably 1 out of every 5 garments that's imported that has cotton in it has probably Uyghur slave labor in it. And so if you imagine most Americans going into their closet right now, pulling out their clothes, finding made in China, I mean, they're part of the problem too. And so we have a lot of cleanup to do. And I do think that there is a path for Biden, that he knows he can't go back to the way it was during the Obama administration, nor should it. And I think he knows that it would be unwise to take those tariffs away right now, because they do present a form of leverage for Joe Biden. And so that is important. And so it's how he uses that leverage and what issues he prioritizes that are going to be the most important. And my hope is that instead of being deals on soybeans and signing ceremonies, that it's fundamentally about creating a level playing field for American workers by reducing subsidies in China, state ownership in China, increasing environmental protections in China, or having them pay a cost if they don't through what's called border adjustment, and raising up workers' rights. And I think those are very important. And at the same time, and this is part of the Build Back Better agenda, we need to invest here at home. I mean, just because you're putting tariffs on China doesn't mean that you're suddenly going to make America more competitive. And that's what Trump missed. You need to invest in workers. You need to invest in our own innovation. We need a tax code that is fair to the middle class. You need to make sure that we have a skills training program that is broad-based. And we need to build up our own capabilities. And you can do that through Buy America and other procurement mechanisms as well. And so I hope Biden will use these tools, because it's important not only to push back against the aggression of the Chinese Communist Party, to make sure there's a level playing field overseas, but to make those smart investments here at home as well. And with that, I do think that we can rebalance the relationship. We don't want China as a Cold War enemy. We don't want to start a shooting war with China, but we do want to make sure that China understands that we're not going to tolerate unfair trade practices, and we are going to speak out when we see crimes against humanity. And I think hopefully Biden can help to project that through his economic policy and through his foreign policy. And unlike Trump, that we can work with allies to do this when we're able to persuade them to join us in these ventures.
I look at, I don't know if you saw the interview with former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who he believes that in the next decade we're going to end up in some type of a conflict with Russia or with China. Do you see that? Do you see his point and where we're heading?
I don't know that I agree with Rex Tillerson. I mean, obviously that's a possibility, just as it was. And I know, we both were raised during the Cold War, right? And it was entirely possible that there could have been some terrible conflict with the Soviet Union.
Mutual assured destruction, sure.
Yeah, and we all live with that, and it was terrifying. I don't want to re-experience that with respect to China, but there were also mechanisms that we put into place during the Cold War to try to reduce those tensions. And so I do think that that is possible as well. I do think China has major ambitions, and I think Xi Jinping has only grown in that type of nationalism and that ambition. And so I do think that we need to be forceful, but we don't need to be overbearing or warmongering as we're doing this. We need to, if China knows that we have lines here with respect to human rights, democracy, other types of issues, I believe that it is possible to reach an understanding, but we will be in a better position to do that if we develop more capabilities here at home to make semiconductors, to make batteries, to make all that stuff that we now depend on China for, from medicines and PPEs to components that go into our clean energy future. We're entirely too dependent on China. And that was a huge mistake that corporate America was eager to do because they could line their pockets. And unfortunately, some in government thought was good because they think they could bring China into the community of nations and prompt, I guess, more collaborative behavior, which didn't work out. And so we do need to reclaim some of that. I don't necessarily think this ends in conflict with China, but I think we have to understand that they are a strategic competitor, that we have to take it seriously, and that we can no longer harbor the notion that being kind to China or expecting more trade with China will lead to more democracy is going to be the outcome, because it's not. Yeah. And the past couple of decades have shown that.
No, you're right. And I wish I could be as generous as you are that politicians thought that we could bring them in and we would all live happily together and all that kind of stuff. I see it as people were just purely greedy. They saw cheap, exploitable labor. They saw lax environmental regulations, and they saw corporate America just doling out cash, which is why we kept the pipeline open to let them go, and we actually paid their moving expenses. To me, we gave our manufacturing base away, and we've created the moment that we're in. But my fear is that over the last 4 years, Donald Trump has walked away from the international community. For the last 10 years, we've walked away from foreign aid and helping other places. That's only made China be able to fill that void and become stronger around the world. So getting more people around with us to hold them in check seems to be much more difficult today than it was 4 years ago.
Yeah, it is and it isn't. I do think that Biden will engender far more trust coming into office than Trump ever did. Okay, so I think that he has that going for them. And I don't think that China has been particularly adept at keeping lasting friends, that the Silk Road Initiative, that all of this other stuff is kind of a 21st century form of colonialism with Chinese characteristics, right? They want something in return. They want exclusive access. They want the money. They want to send their workers to these locations around the world as well, and they want to build up military facilities. And so I do think that it's possible for Biden to engage, particularly with Europe and our allies in Southeast Asia, to check this. And if they know the United States can be a reliable ally and will work in concert with them, I think that there's a chance, although I agree with you that I think some countries are so kind of intertwined with China that they don't see the kind of threat that we may here. And I think that we need to deal with that. And Rick, above all else, and I want to be very clear about this, I think the way that Trump approached this too often resulted in scapegoating Chinese people, both here and in China as well. And that is completely the wrong thing to do. That's exactly what the Chinese Communist Party wants to see happen.
Yeah.
We have to be very careful about this approach to make sure that it's obviously not in any way racist or inflammatory, but that our objections are against the actions of the Chinese Communist Party, which a lot of people have fled to, and that we are in concert with them, trying to make sure that their rights are protected no matter where they are.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Last question I've got for you. The inauguration on Wednesday, a lot of people have thoughts of things that they want to hear. I'm curious, what are you looking for in the president's, our president-elect, soon-to-be president's inauguration speech?
Well, I think Joe Biden has done an excellent job of articulating a vision for the short term and the long term in the United States, summarized by getting us through this pandemic, number one. Number two, making sure that we have an economic recovery. Number three, making sure that we erode structural racism in this country. And number four, building back better. And so I expect him to articulate that. I think a lot of Americans will be on board with that. And we look forward to working in the Congress and with the Trump administration to making sure we are making those transformational investments in our future, in our infrastructure, in our clean energy, and that we are making that in America. And that, I think, is something that will have lasting benefits for communities in Pennsylvania and around the country, for the middle class, for a generation to come, if he can get that done.
No, I'm right there with you. Scott, I appreciate the time and the thoughts. Thanks so much.
Of course, Rick. Thank you.
Good stuff, as always. Our good friend Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. AmericanManufacturing.org is their website. And to his point, look, everybody, both sides of the political aisle on board with the idea of building it here, purchasing it here, domestic production, domestic consumption, buy American, very popular. Even Trump, referenced it today in his little goodbye spiel. A good place to start, and I think Scott's absolutely right. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this